Hi, Kristen. Looks like you are in the South here with me in Florida, right?
Yes, that is true.
Yes.
Hi, Hamid. Good to see you.
Hello. Likewise. Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself to get started. I know you have a deep background with Madison Reed and other places. Be great to learn a little bit about your experience before we dive in.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in the marketing industry now, I suppose, just about 20 years, which I almost can't believe. And I started on the agency side, having the really good fortune to work with just amazing creatives, amazing technologists, and amazing analytics folks, which I think bodes well for this conversation today. And then moved into the brand world. And again, was fortunate there too to work with some just incredible brands, Ralph Lauren, who I'm actually wearing now, Ralph Lauren, Oscar de la Renta, the portfolio of Coty brands in beauty, and then American Eagle, Aerie, PacSun, and then most recently Madison Reed, where I just recently left. So just an incredible group of brands. And I think having started on the digital side, my backbone has always been sort of performance digital marketing, but then to add the brand responsibility over the last couple of years has been incredibly eye-opening. And to see the balance between sort of the what being brand and the how being the rigor behind performance marketing, I now understand why those two worlds coming together in the most symbiotic of ways is critically important to success.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. So it kind of leads to like two areas, of questioning, right? Number one is the brand that you mentioned. Some of them are entrenched, right, with brand loyalty, like Ralph Lauren and stuff. And then, some of the others are kind of like startups and fighting for that shelf space or that mind share. So how do you look at the brand versus performance based on, a startup scrambling for shelf space versus an entrenched brand with a lot of loyalty?
I think, a brand is a brand, right? So at the end of the day, you really want to think about how do I build a brand while enabling performance marketing to do their best work in a brand enhancing way. I think what's difficult is every company these days, whether larger or a startup, and they should focus on this. The only metric that really matters is sales. But ultimately, what drives sales is a litany of these micro moments that just include, you know, brand campaign development, content, then placement of that content at the right time, at the right place, all powered by, I think, a supercharged performance engine. So I think any brand in the world right now, sort of in this modern marketplace where everybody is fighting for not only wallet share, but consumers' mind share, has to walk that line really carefully. And one definitely feeds the other. I also think, and I again say this coming from a place where I started sort of in performance marketing, but I think any brand out there can performance market itself to death. And I say that because there's only so many customers from a lower funnel perspective that you're able to go after before you just keep talking to the same ones. You're driving a tremendous amount of inefficiency. So, really, the opportunity is to figure out within your marketing spend what are those upper funnel activities? What is the right place for you to be as a brand? And what are the different layers of storytelling? And by that, I mean not just buy now, shop now, et cetera, but learn more about our collaboration, learn more about our influencer partners or our network of sales associates who are brand ambassadors. And then, of course, there are even more upper funnel brand plays by way of partnerships and so forth. But you really need to be laser focused on both in order to make the entire machine work. And again, that's regardless of size of brand.
That's a great point. So uh, I think the term you had used before was almost like back to the future, right? So we've become so focused on D2C, so focused on return on ad spend and all that. So how do you see the going back up the funnel, right? Going back to the future almost. So what are your thoughts on how brands can do that, especially in the fashion beauty marketing area?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love the Back to the Future analogy because I think about sort of Marty McFly getting into the flying car with Doc. But I think what's happening is there's been a shift from sort of the height of COVID, where customer acquisition costs were very low, spend had been pulled back depending on the industry and the brand. And so it was a bit of a free for all. You could pick up customers left and right. Now, whatever we're in, post or almost the end of COVID, brands are spending again. Competition is so tough. And then you have a couple of other technology factors happening. You had the iOS changes that happened last spring, which just makes your typical targeting less effective than it was before, driving up your acquisition costs. The second piece is everybody, of course, is talking about the cookieless world that is sort of impending, which is going to further, I think, swing the pendulum away towards just this day in, day out, CAC focus. Let's place our bets in all the usual, sort of the usual places. And instead, really think about two things. One, how do we drive brand love? And that includes not only awareness and consideration, but some of those softer metrics around how do you create communities of people that really, really love and talk about the brand on your behalf. The second, I think there's a huge opportunity in terms of loyalty. So again, customer acquisition costs going up. How do you turn, even if it's a small group of people, depending on the size of the brand, into real loyalists and brand ambassadors? And you see brands like Credo, for example, in beauty, who has an incredible loyalty program. And alongside of that, a lot of brand content. So if you go to their YouTube page, there are, interviews and makeup tutorials with all of their different beauty partner brands. They have celebrity makeup artists on there. And that's, I think, their way of focused on loyalty, focused on content, knowing that customer acquisition is just so tough right now. And by the way, they say that high tide raises all ships. So by focusing on all of that content development from a brand perspective, what they're actually going to see come back is probably increased SEO rankings, increased buzz about the brand, which ultimately translates to sales. And then the performance marketing doesn't have to quite work so hard.
Yeah, that's interesting. So from, I'm more on the performance marketing side from the activation side, but I think the area that a lot of marketers miss is exactly what you're talking about, the content and the interaction. So how have you seen that over your career? How influential is the content and that piece of it versus the nuts and bolts, which I deal with, which is finally left-handed trombone players that need hair dye, right? So how do you tie that together in that area, like the content and that piece?
I think the content is the what. And then whether it's performance marketing or media buys, whatever you want to call it, that's ultimately the how to reach the customer. But a couple different thoughts on content. One, it can't be one size fits all for every platform. So what you're looking for on Snapchat, which I saw Gucci Beauty, for example, just launched a Snapchat lens to try to go after that younger consumer because they know that all the eyeballs are there. And that's a great brand play. Is that going to result in an immediate sale of a Gucci lipstick? Who knows? Maybe Snap has some really good targeting capabilities, of course. But ultimately, that's an upper funnel brand play to insert Gucci Beauty in front of eyeballs on the platform in order to get that consumer to consider the brand. So that's what I mean about content cannot be one size fits all across the platform. Gucci's play there was a very specific lens in that example with Snapchat as a partner. I'm sure what they're doing on Instagram versus what they're doing on TikTok looks totally different. So you really need a multifaceted content strategy. And as we were talking about earlier, you need to make sure that there's layers to the brand storytelling, because let's say you're a brand that has low awareness. It's going to take the customer probably a couple times, a couple different touches before they understand what's the value proposition, why should I pay attention, why should I click, why should I be interested at all in you. And that happens all before you're ready to buy. So again, that message might be, and I saw this with Tiffany, for example, today, the jewelry company. They had an ad. It was absolutely beautiful. I think they bought out at least a part of the masthead of the New York Times. Beautiful ad, celebrity starring in the ad, walking in Paris. It romances you, it brings you in. you click, you go to tiffany.com, but it's a page where you can learn more about the campaign. So again, they're still pulling you in. Now, I'm sure they'll do this, but what I hope to see later today or tomorrow is a retargeting ad from Tiffany, right? And that retargeting ad might say, maybe it's a shop now, maybe it's a learn more about our jewelry collection that's associated with that particular campaign. But again, that's an example of how do you create these sort of bite-sized moments that are further leading people down the funnel rather than just coming out of the gate and telling them to shop now, particularly if it's a lesser known brand.
So that gets into, where and how would this pull, right? So, you talked a little bit about TikTok and some of the social media, and there have been a lot of changes with some of the privacy stuff. And the Facebook announcement yesterday, they've lost like $10 billion or something. So, it's starting to impact how you market it, right? So there are a lot of the influencers and those kind of things that you used before. So you're not getting that attribution right there, right? That you used to be able to do before to say, hey, this influencer, I saw this, and now I can measure that somebody actually bought this. So how do you see that changing in this? Do you still see the influencer type of marketing with the fashion beauty products, or are you thinking there's a shift back toward the way it used to be before with a lot more TV and that kind of stuff?
I think it's both. And the interesting thing about this marketplace right now, and you mentioned TV. So think about streaming TV. You're able to shift your budgets around pretty quickly and nimbly, depending on what you're seeing. I think there will still be a role for the influencer for sure, because they have scale, reach. They also have, and this is why they're called influencers. They have influence, particularly in different markets. So in my experience, as of late, we've seen, much more sales sort of coming in from that influencer population at a much more affordable rate versus where bets would have been placed in the past in terms of more traditional digital routes, if that makes sense. So I think influencers are still around in fashion and beauty. But then I think brands need to experiment with, if we swing back to this back to the future notion where there's TV testing happening on streaming, there's out of home and digital out of home, then how does that whole mix sort of look to contribute to the whole?
Right. So I totally understand that part. The thing that that we deal with from the Stirista side, where we're talking to a lot of customers where they want to know, what is the return on my ad spend, right? So I'm spending $100. How much am I, getting out of it from a sale perspective? So as these things change, does that model change? Or do you look at it more holistically across all channels and say, hey, I gotta kind of change my, ad spend attribution, or try to figure out what you were trying to do, because the markets have changed, because things have changed with regulations and things like that?
It's a great question. And I don't think you can value every media type the same in terms of what's the immediate ROI. And I say that sort of actually relevant to this conversation, which is the brand investment, right? So the two ways that I think about it is you take your total marketing budget and you figure out, based on the size of the brand, what the sales growth objectives are, et cetera. How much can you siphon away? Is it 10%, 20% in terms of upper funnel brand plays? And then the metrics around those things are very different. So, brands in the past, like American Eagle, for example, we actually had a brand love metric, and that included awareness, consideration, YouGov ranking, et cetera. And ultimately, brands know that the greater the sort of love quotient, if you will, ultimately the greater the shareholder value. So you could attribute those upper funnel initiatives to things like impressions in market. Are you driving bookings or sales in a particular region if you heavy up, let's say, out of home and isolate the other regions from an A/B test perspective? So it's correlative. I think then on the other hand, you have the hard hitting kind of CAC focused media channels. And that all day long is going to be what's the CAC to LTV and how quickly are you going to get paid back? That's where I think different businesses are interesting and loyalty comes in. Because if you can get somebody to buy the brand once or twice, then get them to sign up for a loyalty program and really extend that LTV, then you might be able to afford, the cost of customer acquisition to be a little bit higher, right? But it's just a different. The way I look at it is there are two different metrics between how you're valuing the ROI on the brand side versus the performance marketing buy now side.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting metric, shareholder value, right? So, most of us look at shareholder value as, hey, my stock price went up, right? So I've got more value from the stock. How do you attribute, or how do you tie marketing into that, right? What's the measurable, like in some of the places you've been, like a Ralph Lauren or something like that, where there is built-in intrinsic shareholder value because everybody knows Ralph Lauren. So how do you, as a beauty brand or the fashion brand, how do you even say, hey, we've driven shareholder value?
I mean, I think it's in a couple of ways, right? One is just pure sales. The second is what we were just discussing, which is how do you value the upper funnel brand initiatives and create the correlation where you have X amount more, hundreds of millions impressions in market. How long does that take then in terms of driving the sale? And I think all brands are trying to figure that out right now. At some of these brands over the years, the groups had been separate between brand would be over here doing all the really incredible kind of wow things, from advertising campaigns to big sort of store technology takeovers to big partnerships. And then again, you'd kind of have off in a silo, and now I'm talking, 5 to 10 years ago, you'd have sort of off in a silo the performance marketing team. And I think what we've seen over the past couple of years is a shift where those two come together, because you can't be planning sort of brand in isolation of what your media campaign is ultimately at the end of the day. So I think that shift helps make the connection for shareholder value between all these activities even clearer than it's been in the past.
So this question was actually on the previous panel, and I thought it was actually great question, was how does something like reviews and those kind of things tie into this, right? So do you look at reviews as a performance or as a brand, or a combination of both?
It's a great question. And I think it's a combination of both, because brand includes reputation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brand reviews, also includes if I see something I love, or as the woman from Ulta was just talking about, the power behind kind of the peer review. Also in beauty, the Ulta beauty or the Allure beauty seal, I think is one example of a review at the most heightened level. I buy a lot of products that have the award seal on it. So I see it being in both ways. The other reason I think it helps from a performance perspective is also the more ratings and reviews that you can accumulate, it helps in two ways. One, your SEO rankings for sure, so that you're covering a wide range of topics, different products, et cetera. But then the other is really the ability to use ratings and reviews in your marketing materials. And that's where maybe it's a lower funnel play that comes in. So I've heard about this brand. I might have seen the Tiffany ad, for example, that we talked about earlier, but then to have somebody say the not jewelry, making it up, this is what I saw earlier today, the not jewelry is so incredible. It never tarnishes. It feels special. It's lightweight when I put my earrings in, et cetera. And that's a rating and review. You can actually use that content as a direct marketing vehicle in order to get the consumer over that purchase hump. So I see it as both brand reputation and hugely beneficial from a performance marketing perspective.
Great. Now shifting gears a little bit. So we've got this pandemic. We're in Florida, so nobody here thinks there's a pandemic. But with the stuff that's going on, there's been a lot more shift to like a D2C, buy stuff on the web, get it shipped, versus going to a store or something like that, how does that drive marketing, right? So how does that change that whole brand to performance type of thing, right? So different measurables, foot traffic versus site visits. Yeah, how does that affect things, or how did it affect your thinking in the past?
I think on the one hand, brands that have physical locations are at an advantage even during this very strange time. And I say that because for some brands, it is the best representation of the brand essence to be able to walk into a physical store, experience the interaction with the customer service representatives, and really understand what this brand kind of lives and breathes every day. And actually, Ralph Lauren is an incredible example of that. You walk into any one of those stores, and the website is beautiful, by the way, but you walk into any one of those stores, and I don't know about you, but my breath is always taken away. There's a certain smell, there's always certain very consistent visual cues, and it's an incredible experience. So I think having those outposts help with regard to new customer acquisition as well as loyalty for that matter. And what you've seen brands like that do in the past is reward, from a loyalty perspective, their very best customers with exclusive access to events and experiences, whether they be in the store or otherwise, as a result of being a great customer. So I think that physicality, while dialed back right now for obvious reasons, minus in Florida, to your point, but dialed back makes sense. But I think regardless of, obviously the metaverse being such a hot kind of topic right now, I still think people are yearning for getting back to experiences and live events and so forth. And brands that can tap into that when appropriate and safe at the right time, I think are the ones that are going to win.
Okay, so from a beauty versus fashion, let's split out the two. Going back to the previous question, is there a difference between the fashion industry versus the beauty industry with that? Is it a different dynamic, or can it be all lumped together?
I mean, I think what's interesting is that it depends on the brand. There are a lot of beauty brands. If you think about, Coty's portfolio, for example, I think there was only one or two of the 76 at the time that I was there that actually had a physical freestanding presence. So there was a pop-up, if I'm remembering correctly, in Times Square with one of the brands. And then I think Philosophy, who had their own website, might have also had, their own retail store. And I bring that up because when I talked about sort of potentially, if done well, a physical location being the best example of a brand's essence, a lot of beauty brands don't have their own stores. Some do. Fresh is an example of one, and I think their stores are incredibly well done, but a lot are distributed through third parties. So it just makes the dynamic different versus a lot of the retail brands that I've been with on the fashion side that do have their own stores.
And then that brings in, sites like Amazon, right, where the brand is Amazon, and you're fighting against, all the other folks out there and things like that. So how does Amazon affect this, or how did it affect your marketing, right? So how did you handle something like that?
It's a great question, and I think a lot of brands in both fashion and beauty are trying to work their way through Amazon. On the one hand, friend, because to carry your products on Amazon helps, particularly smaller brands that are less well known, helps from a brand awareness perspective. So friend for sure. The faux part is because if you're a Prime member, it is so easy to just click and buy on that website versus, let's say, your owned brands. I think everybody over the last couple of years has been struggling with, what role does Amazon play in our marketing mix? Do we want to partner with them in a limited capacity, meaning perhaps there are certain SKUs that are exclusive to the broader us as a brand, And then there's some offshoot that's on Amazon, again, just for the brand awareness piece. So I don't know that there's a one size fits all answer other than to say Amazon has to be a part of your strategy.
Okay, that that leads to another question, which I get a lot when because a lot of our clients that are on Amazon only put portion of their SKUs, as you mentioned, and then they try to figure out how Amazon's doing versus everything else, right? So they'll run campaigns with us, they'll put stuff on Amazon, they'll try to patch things up in the back and try to figure out what's working. Um, unless you're the only way they really can figure things out is if they're shipping it themselves, right? If they're getting an order through Amazon and shipping versus storing at Amazon, have Amazon, sell it, they really don't know the demographic details, right? So when you're putting something on Amazon, do you consider that, or do you just say, hey, whatever I can sell, or does it go into like what products go on Amazon versus staying off of Amazon?
I think as we were saying, it ties back to what products can go on Amazon that I don't feel would be detrimental to the brand, right? Because of the awareness play. Now, what I have heard recently about Amazon is that you can put your own sort of piece of collateral in the package with an outbound Amazon shipment, I believe, provided it is to promote your loyalty program. So that is one way to try to attribute the sale. And then the
Mhm.
picking up of a new customer for your brand with a code, let's say, on that piece of collateral.
Right.
So that's one way to get around it. But I think, as we said, I think a lot of brands are struggling with what does a limited assortment look like there? And then what's the return? And then, as you mentioned, the other factor to consider, of course, is that you need performance marketing dollars to make sure that your brand and products are seen on Amazon. So, I think what'll be interesting to see is how people handle that. Is that sort of in a separate group that's focused on wholesale? Is that brought into the broader marketing organization? Because maybe that's where the performance marketing experts sit. And then how are you constantly looking at budgets across the board, Amazon versus your own channels based on the return that you're seeing?
Yeah, no, that's great. This brings me back to something I had, asked you a while back. How does the whole brand versus awareness with all these different channels? How does it change when you're a startup and you're just trying to get going versus the established brand, right? So in the perception of, hey, I'm just scrambling to get my name out, right? That's one side, and the other side is I've been a brand for 100 years and everybody knows me. So, and you've been at both. So, how does that mix happen, right? Where do you think that you go from more of a performance to more of a, hey, I'm a brand now and I need less of this and more of this, right? So, where do
Yeah,
you see that happening?
it's such a great question. And I think it depends on the performance metrics of your hard hitting lower funnel um, marketing dollars. And I say that
Mm,
because if you start to see the cost of new customer acquisition rise and rise and rise, and you realize that perhaps you are talking to the same people because maybe you are in the same channels, then I think startups have to grow, right? So that's where you say, how do we introduce some and slowly upper funnel metrics or and campaigns into the mix? And then what does ROI look like? How do you make sure that everybody holds hands? And then also, how do you try, working either with your internal team or your agency, your performance agency? How do you try to figure out when you're going to get that payback to know if you should pull back on those brand activities and continue to fuel only performance marketing or keep trying to give it a go? I think on the bigger brand side, you just have the luxury of time in a different way, where you have a brand partnership. It was interesting. We did one at American Eagle where we partnered with Universal Music Group and put up and coming artists, five of them, on tour. We drove them around in a branded bus and then had them perform in our stores and malls. And so, yes, that's a brand play. But at the same time, what we wanted to look at was there an increase in foot traffic into those stores either before and or after that particular event, given the buzz in that market, right? And then same thing was true with sales. And then same thing was true with is obviously American Eagle has tremendous brand awareness, but was there better, let's say, brand consideration in those markets? So that's an example of, I think that tour, if I'm remembering correctly, was about 6 months in total, and you have the luxury of time with those bigger brands for those brand activities to set in.
So, so from a brand activity, did you in your career find that they work better with other partners? Like having, like, what I mean by that is, you as you tie in other brands, did you find that that helped you, or it was more of just trying to have a different way of driving people to your store or something like that?
It's a good question. I think the right brand partners can be accretive to the business for a couple different reasons. Depending on the size of the brand, they can help smaller brands drive their own awareness and scale. I think, again, with the right partner, it can give brands credibility to play in new spaces. So let's say retail goes into gaming or retail goes into sports. Again, the right partner can help you establish credibility in those adjacent categories and bring new customers in as a result of being in front of a different set of eyeballs at the right time with a unique brand message. So in my experience, again, the right partners can help make a good difference.
So that leads to a different of a tactical question. So something like a sponsorship, right? Would you consider that a brand activity or a performance activity? How do you look at those kind of things? And I know that it's huge in the fashion and beauty world to sponsor different things. So where do you see that fitting in?
I see it sitting in brand, but being sort of a performance marketer, sort of way back when, I always look for those partnerships to figure out where are the performance hooks. So how do we, I was with a brand that did a partnership with the LA Rams, for example, and we were constantly working with them to try to figure out, could we get access to your email list and turn it into a performance play, right? Or could we be embedded on your social media channels, for example? How do we try to get people who come through this partnership? How do we try to make sure that we're getting their contact info to go back to them and sell the products at a later date? And then frankly, how do we make sure that we're packaging up all of this content that's occurring at games and using it to build the brand and our SEO rankings and our influence, frankly? So I see it as a brand play, but there are definite opportunities for performance hooks.
That's great. LA Rams would be great this year, right? So
that's right.
Yeah, that would
Go
be
Rams.
big. There you go. So yeah, I used to sell sponsorships in the past, and it was very data driven. It was tied into TV, so tied into who's watching what show and tie that stuff together. So how much research? I know you mentioned the hooks and stuff to try to get that, but how much research goes into like who's an influencer or what program you might sponsor or what team you might sponsor? Is it geo-based, or does it change in different areas and different products, or is it generally a top-down approach? How does a brand look at that?
I think it depends on the brand. Some brands are really excited to just be part of the local community, right? And so it's how can we partner in the right way? And perhaps it's less scientific on the influencer front, because you brought that up as well. You can be very scientific nowadays. You can look at sort of their reputation score, their reach, the engagement that they're getting with their followers, et cetera. and make sure that you're picking the right partner for you. So that would be the data side of things. And then obviously you can look at their aesthetic and make sure that it feels sort of solid from a brand perspective. You also mentioned TV shows, and all of these things sort of run the gamut, but have a similar flavor. In that, I think what you want to go after is you want to buy audiences, and then you look at, okay, where are they spending their time, whether it's TV or programmatic audio, whatever it might be. So starting with the customer first and making sure that you're going to them on the right platforms with the right differentiated content, whatever that looks like, partnerships, program buys from a TV perspective, or influencers is how I would look at all of that.
Great. I think our time has come to an end. Am I right, Jamie, or do we have time for one more question?
You have one more time. You have time for one more question if you'd like.
Okay. Okay. So the next question gets into the whole thing of, now you've set all this up, right? So you've got a great sponsorship program. You've got great influencers. You've got your data, and you're marketing it. How do you pick your tactics? Like, where do you go, right? So, even though you have your audiences all set, how do you look at, where am I going to put how much money, right? What's a determining factor that you've seen in your career with that?
I go back to audiences. I mean, there was a brand that I was working with over the course of my career, and the media plan that sort of what had been done in the past was probably 70% traditional. And given the age, the demographics of the audience, we shifted it pretty quickly to be almost 75% digital. And the reason being is through all of the research, and again, looking at media consumption habits and figuring out by platform where people were spending their time, it made sense for that brand to kind of turn the plan on its head and go after a much, much more aggressive digital footprint. Then the rest of the kind of the allocation of budget was, okay, how do we look at the upper funnel brand building activities? Is there some degree of traditional that's included in there? Or is it partnerships, some balance of both? But it's really starting with the customer and then creating your media allocation accordingly. And like we said earlier, making sure that you're very clear with your team and leadership at whatever the brand is. This is the portion of the budget that is going to return a fairly immediate sale. This is what that looks like from a CAC to LTV perspective. And then this might be the more upper funnel play. Here are the metrics associated with that, but we're going to be fluid to be able to move the budgets accordingly.